You are listening to WTUZ Radio Podcast. Welcome to WTUZ Radio Podcast. I am your host, Rhonda. And today's topic is very, very interesting. And shout out to the sis that sent me this information. She would like to remain anonymous. Very, very interesting topic. I had never heard of this before. So historians say this is a theory. So I don't know for sure. I dug up a couple things. We're going to run through it. And we're going to see how it rolls from there. But I did want to bring this to the family's attention because as we dig deeper into the connections on heritage, so either our personal heritage journey that we are taking, as well as the heritage journey on these dynasties, empires, and rulers, we're seeing a lot of interconnections. So this particular podcast is about the very first Queen of Scotland being an Egyptian. Okay. So it sparked my interest because as we are going through the series, the Black Nobility and the Black Nobility bloodlines and rulers, we have traced back MacAlpine, also known as MacAlpine, as the first leader of Scotland and England, and his bloodline tying back to Africa. So, of course, when I saw this information, it sparked my interest as well. So we're going to start out with this article from the website The Scotsman, and it's saying the Pharaoh's daughter, who was the mother of all Scots. Walter Bauer wrote his compendium of Scottish history, Scota, in the 1440s. The sweeping Latin text aimed to set down the history of the Scottish people from the earliest times, and by so doing to show what race of people we were. He references chronicle from ancient texts and oral history. What he recorded was astonishing. According to Bauer, the Scottish people were not an amalgam of Picts, Scots, and other European people, but were in fact Egyptians who could trace their ancestry directly back to the Pharaoh's daughter and her husband, a Greek king. The queen's name was Scota, from where comes the name Scotland. The Greek king was Gaithilos, hence Gaelic, and their son was known as Hiber, which gives us Hibernia. All right, so all of you Scots, don't know if you've heard this myth, because at this point they're calling it a myth before. So let's continue. Nor was, am I missing something? Okay, I guess not. Nor was Bauer the first to propose such exalted lineage for the Scots. The story goes back further and was even included in the Declaration of Arbroath. This seminal document, written in 1320 by the barons and noblemen of Scotland, was a letter imploring the Pope to intervene on their behalf during the Wars of Independence. The text refers to the ancients who journeyed through Greater Scotia and the Pillars of Hercules to their home in the West, where they still live today. According to tradition, This royal family was expelled from Egypt during a time of great uprising. They sailed west, settling initially in Spain before traveling to Ireland and then on to the west coast of Scotland. The same race of people eventually battled and triumphed over the Picts to become the Scots, the people who united this country. Okay, so as we were going through the bloodlines of the Black nobility, we discovered through McAlpine, the original name is McAlpine, how they integrated with the Picts. Okay, so I had no choice but to assume the Picts were indigenous to the land, or they came to the land earlier than McAlpine's crew and settled. Okay, but let's continue. So this is interesting that they're saying this same race of people eventually battled and triumphed over the Picts to become the Scots, people who united this country. Few historians have taken the story to be anything more than a verbose bit of Middle Ages origins story spinning created by a nation who needed to prove that they were of ancient stock. Most political entities in medieval times try and trace their origin race back into biblical times, says Steve Boardman, lecturer in Scottish history at Edinburgh University. It was a way of asserting the natural existence of the kingdom of the Scots. But now a new book, and this is what we're going to get into. We're going to get into this book. Scota, Egyptian Queen of the Scots by Ralph Ellis, claims to prove that this origin myth was no made-up story, but the actual recording of an Egyptian exodus that did indeed conclude in Scotland. In tracing the sources that could have influenced the declaration of Bowers' Scota Chronicon, he finds that the main British reference was likely to be the 18th century historian Nennius, but it is in tracing Nennius' sources that Ellis thinks he found the answers. He believes that the originator of the Scota Gaethelios story was an ancient text, the history of Egypt, written in 300 BC by an Egyptope Greek historian called Manetho. Ellis writes, the possibility that Manetho was the original author of Scota and Gaethelios story is interesting because it gives the whole story much greater credence. Having traced the original source, which was, if not contemporaneous, at least reasonably informed, Ellis believes that we can begin to put flesh on bones of the story. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the rest of this because we can actually get into the book. I just wanted to give you the highlights from this article as an introduction. So this is from the website The Scotsman, the Pharaoh's daughter who was the mother of all Scots. So, okay. So this is the title of the book, Scota, Egyptian Queen of the Scots by Ralph Ellis. All right, so let me get to my highlights because I had to jump around in here. Oh, wait a minute. Before I do that, I do want to read y'all the opening. Okay, I do want to at least do that. Let's see, is this the one? What I wanted. All right, the Scottish Chronicles. Long, long ago in a faraway land, it is recorded that a prince and a princess were enthroned among the great pomp and ceremony as king and queen of their people. But fate was not looking kindly upon them or the assembled throng of courtiers and officials who supported them, because many of these people would shortly be forced to flee their homes in search of less turbulent lands beyond the Great Sea. The political turmoil that surrounded this marriage and its theological implications took nearly 4 years to fester and ulcerate. Finally, there was a popular uprising of some kind that forced the abdication of the king and queen, but the revolution was peaceful enough that they were allowed to depart with the majority of their administration and followers. Hundreds of people were forced to take to the sea in small, precarious vessels and boldly set off towards the setting sun and great uncertainty. This was an era in which many of these waters were completely uncharted, but since returning to their homes would mean instant death, they sailed on regardless of the dangers. Eventually, after many trials and tribulations, the royal couple and their small flotilla discovered a new land which seemed to hold great promise. Like the Pilgrim Fathers in a much later age, these I'm just going to say immigrants set about creating a new nation, a new Jerusalem, far away from the political and religious strife of their former homeland in Egypt. The prince and princess in the Scottish Chronicles were called Gaithilos and Scota, and it is from these appellations that the Gaelic and Scottish people are reputed to have been named. And while this harmony in terminology may seem a little convenient and possibly even contrived, it should be pointed out that this connection was not derived from modern age romanticism, nor was it from a Victorian fairy tale. In fact, the Chronicle of Gaithilos and Scotia was recorded in the instructions on the pleading of Baldred Basset, two documents drawn up by the Scottish nobles and intended for submission to the papal court to determine the great antiquity of the Scottish people. A small element of this history was then appended to the more famous Declaration of Arbroath, a document that was drawn up on the 6th of April, 1320 AD, possibly by Abbot Bernard de Linton. This famous document, which is comparable in many aspects to the American Declaration of Independence, was likewise signed by numerous earls, barons of Scotland, and then sent on its long journey to Pope John the 22nd. The declaration was made in the wake of Robert the Bruce's victory at Bannockburn in 1314, and like the later American document, it sought to legitimize Scotland's independence from England. All right, so I'm just going to, because I have to, skip around, fam. All right, so as many as half a dozen different sources are cited in Book 1 of the Scota Chronicon, which all follow a similar storyline about the origins and faith of the royal couple, Gaithilos and Scota. So yes, incredible as it may seem, it has been seriously suggested by the ancient chronicles that both Ireland and Scotland were first settled by the descendants of an Egyptian pharaoh, his queen, and their various courtiers and followers. The author has already written 4 books on revisionary Egyptology and has already come to the conclusion that much of the biblical history and many of the biblical characters were actually based upon Egyptian history and personality. All right, so those of you that have been rolling with me for quite some time, you know that we got heavily into the Sumerian text, which predates the Bible, so which predates the Egyptian dynasty. The Bible is based on the Sumerian text, so yes, they are correct that even Egyptian history is based on the Bible. Okay, so Jesus being Horus, and you could just go down the list. Okay, so in agreement with them on that. All right, oops, let me go back. All right, but since the royal families of Europe were founded by the descendants of biblical families and bloodlines, it seems entirely plausible that European history was linked to the Egyptian history in some respects. So I totally agree with this, and that's what fascinated me about this, was the fact that from the religion to the way the government is structured, the way societies are set up, the way their politics are set up, are all linked back to these ancient civilizations described in the Sumerian text, which is the oldest, Egyptian text, and the Bible. All of that is carried forward. All of those particular systems are carried forward in the European system, right? Which ultimately went around the world. Okay, so I'm in agreement with that. Okay, plus the fact that we have other things to back that up. At a minimum, we know that the early European rulers of England and Scotland were out of Africa. Okay, so this is the Scota Chronicon. Just to give you just a little bit of insight of what this really is, in case you want to do some research outside of this. Scota Chronicon is a vast work set out in 16 books. It was nominally written by Walter Bauer, an Augustinian abbot of Inchiclam Monastery in about 1430. Although it was largely his work, he drew extensively on John of Fordham's earlier chronicles of 1360 and quoted extensively from a host of other venerable historians and chroniclers, as was mentioned in the introduction. On this vast work, only book 1, which I can't find book 1. Okay, I'll try to do a little bit more digging, but I couldn't find book 1. I found a bunch of these other volumes, but I couldn't find book 1. Only book 1 deals with the saga of Ellis and Scota. And so the entire chronicle of their and their descendants' exploits are set out in about 80 or so pages. Okay, so I'm going to keep looking for this book 1, and if I find it, I will most certainly do a follow-up on it, because I'm interested. I like to go directly to the source to see what's up. All right, so the interesting part about the story, which has generated so much heated debate and speculation, is that the founding royal couple of both Ireland and Scotland were a Greek prince and an Egyptian princess who became king and queen of Egypt for a short while. Such fantastic accounts are thought to be the stuff of legends, not historical reality, and so much of the earlier sections of Scota Chronicon have been co-signed to a fantasy or mythology shelf. All right, so Donald Watts, the translator of Scota Chronicon, summed up the story in this fashion. The story begins with the mythical voyage of Scota, the Pharaoh's daughter from Egypt. The land that her sons discovered in the Western Ocean was named after her, Scotland. Okay, so I mean, is it Europe named after Europea? Although from a cosmological perspective or astrology perspective, I think Europa is one of the moons of Jupiter, which is still symbolic. We're not gonna get into that because that's the esoteric side of it. But supposedly the name Europa is named after a melanated queen as well. So I just find this interesting all the way around. Okay. Let's see. Let me go to 18. All right. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay. All right. The story itself centers on the royal couple called Gaethlios and Scota, and it is from these two, the individuals that Gaelic and Scot people are said to be known. Gaethlios is said to have been a wayward Greek prince who had a dispute with either his father or brother, and so left Greece to look for new opportunities. Being a precocious and fortunate individual, he is supposed to have arrived in Egypt and ingratiated himself with the royal family there. Against all the known customs of Egypt, he is said to have married the daughter of the pharaoh with a view to inherit the throne of Egypt. However, his successful bid for the throne was not welcomed by the Egyptian proliferate, and so he and his wife, Princess Scota, were expelled from Egypt and embarked upon the epic voyage across the Mediterranean. Okay. The first of these islands was discovered relatively quickly and may have been Mallorca, Mallorca, whatever that is, y'all. Finally, after 4 generations or so, another island home was discovered, and this is more positively identified as being Ireland. It is recorded that both the son and great-great-grandson of Gaethlius were called Hyber, and it is from this name that the countries of Iberia, Spain, and Hibernia, Scotland, are said to have been named. So, child, that kind of tripped me out too. Now, again, we don't know this for sure. This is all just theory, and the purpose of this book, Scota, Egyptian Queen of the Scots, is to just kind of give more insight, and he's trying to prove that this story is true. Many of the, by now, much larger populations of Brigantia then immigrated to Ireland, which was called Scotia, after the name of the people's founding queen. That Ireland was originally called Scotia before the 3rd century AD is fairly well known. All right, you Scots, come on now and drop some more insight on this. This is interesting. Among others, Claudian, Orosius, Marianus, Scotus, Isidori, and Bede all mentioned that Ireland was called Scotia. Surely very much, for Scotland and Ireland are one and the same. Therefore, ye cometh of some writers that Ireland is called Scotia Major. And that which now is named Scotland is called Scotia Minor. Interesting. Okay, you Europeans, the Scots and my Ireland folks, come on now, give us some insight. Have y'all heard of any of this? The name Scota, like the parallel name Hyber, obviously had a habit of moving on to new lands as the people moved to new pastures. And so it is not so surprising that when the Scots settled in Canada, they called their new homeland. Child, let me go on and take a sip of my seltzer water on this. What they call it? Nova Scotia or New Scotia. Child. So now let's just read again what they say it used to be called. That Ireland is called Scota Major, and that which is now is named Scotland is called Scota Minor. And so what was part of Canada? That's really the Americas. What was that renamed when they came over here? Nova Scotia or New Scota? Child. I mean, these folks, they love to name stuff after their homelands and their family names. You remember New York, which is still named after York over in England, but remember it was New Amsterdam first. Okay, I'm talking about when the Europeans came over. So, child. So let me see. I put a note here. All right. I said this also correlates to the many Irish, Scotland, and British names across the Americas today, and including Spaniard names, most notably in South America and the Caribbean. Yep. So, folks, when they are setting up these colonies, they're renaming stuff. Okay? All right. The people stayed many generations in Ireland, and it is possible that their primary necropolis or burial grounds was either at the megalithic site at Newgrange or the sacred site of Tara. I thought that was interesting that you all have a sacred site called Tara, both of which resides on the river Boyne, or I don't know if that's Boney or Boyne, to the north of Dublin. After many generations, probably in the 6th century BC, the Picts came to Ireland from an unknown location. All right, so we're going to get into that. But let's look at this map, because I want my European fam. I want y'all. Dang, y'all was hoping I could blow this map up. Doggone it, nabbit. I can't blow it up. All right, so the map demonstrates that Ireland was called Scotia. Child. This is really, really interesting. Okay, so sorry I can't blow this up, fam. But if you could see my cursor, there you have it. There's Ireland, called Scotia. Child. So I had a note on this Pitts stuff. Okay, so the Pitts were linked with the Alpine House via Kenneth McAlpine. Perhaps it was through marriage. So I'm just going to jump over real quick. Doggone it, I should have had it up. That's on me for not having it up. So hold on a second. Let me I just put that Civil War picture up. Y'all actually can't see that. All right. Well, let me try to find let me pull up my source. I thought I had it. I forgot to pull it up rather. Okay, so we're going to pull that up. Just a second here. I want to pull up my book. I'm going to have to bear with me here. It is, I want to pull this up for you. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, I can bring it back on the screen for you. Okay, where is it at? Display. All right, so we're just gonna and this is the book that we're doing our series off of, about the Black nobility and bloodlines and rulers. Okay, so we are going to pick back up on this particular series. We're literally going through all of the rulers from Scotland and the British Isles, and we are going through like the houses and all of that jazz. Okay, so again, this is why this particular information intrigued me. Okay, because they're talking about the Pitts in here. Okay, so let's go back to the House of Alpine or Alpine. So it's saying Fergus Moore, Negro, Kenneth McAlpine, Donald Mac Alpine, Constantine. So it's going through all of these names. The following rulers of Scotland, regardless of their blood connection with Kenneth McAlpine, politically selected other dynasty titles. Okay, so it's going through all of these houses. I think somebody in the comment section was asking about the different houses, and I think the question was when the white rulership came into play. Okay, so all of these different houses, this, and the third. So the forefather of Kenneth McAlpine, and it's just so y'all know, I discovered McAlpine was pretty much a variation exists today called McAlpine, and that's why I keep making the mistake of saying McAlpine, because I'm more familiar with McAlpine than McAlpine. Right, so the forefather of Kenneth McAlpine and all his descendants was Ferguson Moore, the Negro Black or Niger, who was the first king of Scotland. Now, this is interesting because they talking about up in the Greek Westface and Geneva Bibles. The African Ethiopian is identified as a Moor. Okay, so they're going through all of the variations of what Moor mean, but basically meaning a heavily melanated, aka black person. The Scottish, British, Moorish King James made a comment to his wife Anne that his lineage sprung from Fergus race. In the Great Gallery of the place of Holyrood, Holyrood House in Edinburgh, there exist 89 portraits of the Scottish king from Fergus Moore, Negro, to Charles II, the Black Boy. Okay, so I'm just bringing up to the fam. Either way you cut it, the rulership, the original rulership of Scotland, England, and Ireland were heavily melanated, aka black. Okay? So this particular work, they're linking them back to Ethiopia. Okay? What we're on now, they're linking it back to the princess back to Egypt. All right, so let's go on. So this is the first time the Picts came into play. The Christian converted Moorish Pictish Kenneth MacAlpine, who was also called Niger Val Dub, because remember, Dub means black. So you know that Dublin means black land. So Niger Val Dub was the first king of Scottish Alpine dynasty. Okay. So the Scottish archaeologist David McRitchie stressed that Alpine, the father of Kenneth MacAlpine, was a half-black Pict and a half-black Scot, whose son Kenneth was the first to merge the two foremost branches of the blacks in Scotland. Okay, so with the question of the Picts, let me jump back over here, where they're saying after many generations, probably in the 6th century BC, the Picts came to Ireland from an unknown location. So to be honest, I don't know if the Picts was already there as indigenous folks, and that MacAlpine and them married into it or not. Okay. So just to jump down, saying every king who followed Kenneth MacAlpine was of Moorish descent. MacAlpine's descendant, Kenneth Dub, Niger, Duff, or Duffy, and all his successors were called the Sons of the Black, the four most popular African Moorish kings to rule Scotland were Kenneth MacAlpine, Niger Val Dub, Kenneth the Niger, Macbeth, and King James Stewart. Okay? All right, so I just wanted to refresh the fam's memory that this, what they're calling a myth of the original queen of Scotland being from Egypt, which is / Africa, because you know some people like to forget, conveniently like to forget, that Egypt is in what they're calling now Africa. It still baffles me, but it's not far-fetched for me because of the fact that we know this MacAlpine lineage was from Africa. Okay? All right, so the chronicles indicate that the Scotian people were not impressed with these unwelcome, but possibly, I can't make this up, y'all. Let me sip on this water. Now, the chronicles indicate, and I'm going to try to find that first one, that the Scotian people were not impressed with these unwelcome, but possibly related newcomers to their shores, and that the Basque had come with no or too few women. A deal was therefore struck whereby the Scotian people of Ireland gave the Basque, the Picts, some of their women and advised them to go to Scotland instead. This they did, and the new Scotian Pictish colony there became rather successful, so much so that many of the Scotians later immigrated to that region by choice. It was through this process that the name Scotia became transferred from Ireland to what we now call Scotland. Likewise, Iberia, the name for Spain, that had been derived from the son of Getholius, called Hyber, was also donated to Scotland, donated to Scotland, which became known as Hibernia. Okay, so pretty interesting stuff here. All day long, I believe the Picts intermarried. You know, kind of same thing that we see today in the Americas, the intermarrying going on, and them being related to each other. So meaning, they're saying the Basque being related to these Africans. Very well possible. Very well possible. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, the first avenue of research might be the origins of the text. Scota Chronicon is a Scottish chronicle based upon much older texts that have come from many locations, including Ireland, the Liber Gabala from the Book of Leinster, and Wales, the Historia Brittonum. But this diverse range of chronicles is obviously not the original source, so where did the story originate? One possibility is given to us by Nennius, the monk who penned the Historia Brittonum. He indicated that he used Roman and ecclesiastical documents to compose his history of Britain, and this seems likely as some of his work appears to be taken from the World Chronicle by Bishop Eusebius. It will be demonstrated in a later chapter that the chronology of Egypt used in Scota Chronicon was taken directly from Eusebius, so he is definitely a likely source for the Scota story. But as ever, Eusebius was only quoting others, and it would appear that some of his inspiration was taken from Euhemerus, a Greek historian who wrote a physiological romance called Sacred Scripture. Although it embedded features of the Scota story, Euhemerus' story was largely fictional, and what we really looking for is a true history. All right, so again, they're trying to find out where the source of this quote quote myth / story came from. So that's all they're saying there. They're going through who one of the authors of the story, and then trying to determine where he got it from. So that's all they're saying in that. And I'm just going over that to let you know how controversial this is and how they're trying to prove it. All right, so let's see. All right, so trying to see how far back. Even aspects that are generally unknown today, let alone in cold and drafty monastery in the 15th century Scotland, can be shown to be correct. Take, for instance, the general history of Egypt. This is described as the kingdom of Egypt, the name of which was originally Etheria, is the most ancient of all kingdoms except for the kingdom of Scotia. All right. Egypt is indeed a very ancient kingdom, as we all know, but that is not the interesting element here. The fascinating aspect of this quote is the unusual name that was given to Egypt, Etheria. Surprisingly enough, Egypt was indeed known as Etheria, and the true spelling of the name in the Egyptian was actually Arturti, Arturti or Eturti. All right, so it's just saying the name relates to the water and the flooding of the Nile. But let's get to it. In addition, Geoffrey Keating, the vulnerable historian of Ireland, indicates that this name for Egypt was reduced down to the name Aria in later generations and used for that's why I highlighted this, child. I had forgot. Used for the name of the island, Ireland. Child. So let me just jump back here. So they basically saying, going by Egypt's original name, Etheria, and it was actually Arturti or Eturti, and that was reduced down because y'all know how things over the centuries or whatever, either stuff gets renamed or it's the enunciation starts to get pronounced differently. Okay, I mean, heck, we see that today. You all at Rock With Me know, my country language, I'll botch up a word in a minute. But anyhow, they were saying it was reduced down to area in later generations and used for the islands of Ireland. So it's saying it is from the area that the modern name of Erie was derived. Thus, the current name for Ireland is actually a corruption of an original name of Egypt. Interestingly, Keaton states that this was also the original name for Crete, and we shall be looking at some, what? All right, so I have already demonstrated that the Judaism was based upon the creed and culture of the Amarna regime of Pharaoh Akhenaten, and that many of the Old Testament verses have been copied verbatim from ancient Egyptian texts, including large segments of Genesis, Exodus, Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Solomon, and the Lord's Prayer. And I'm just going to throw in if that was copied directly out of the Sumerian text, because you can literally line it up word for word. Only difference is the Sumerian text, instead of saying the Lord this, the God that, it gives you actual names. But here we go. We tend to think of our present culture as being a mix of Celtic, Roman, and Anglo-Saxon societies that have been heavily influenced by a later blanket of Judaism, Christianity. However, had early Celtic culture been founded upon Egyptian principles, Amarna principles, we would hardly notice the difference. I'm seconding that with you, author, because the Amarna culture of Pharaoh Akhenaten is our Judeo-Christian culture, whether this was derived directly from Egypt or via indirect transmission route of Israel and Rome. Like I've been saying, and I'm going to keep being consistent, based on research, again, religion, politics, and how to structure the society norms comes from these ancient civilizations. Okay, so if you want to put Egypt in there, fine, but the Sumer civilizations, that's where this stuff stems from. Okay. All right, so let me go back. I don't know where I jumped to. What page is this? 24. All right, so where am I at? 24. Okay, so why is this not doing it? If I had a mark, I don't know why it's doing this. Okay, I'm just going to read this right quick. I don't know what happened to my highlights. Maybe I forgot to highlight. This brings us back to the nub of this investigation, for if Princess Scota was the daughter of a pharaoh, then evidence for her existence should be available in the relatively well-recorded history of Egypt. Some of the previous research and speculations into her origins has casually identified her as a daughter of Pharaoh Akhenaten of the Amarna dynasty, but not shown any convincing reason why this should be so. In contrast, this chapter will not only positively identify the pharaoh and his daughter, Princess Scota, but also positively identify her husband, Prince Gaithelios, in historical records. This will represent a fundamental turning point in the Irish-Scot history, not simply because it will be shown that both Scota and Gaithelios are relatively well known, but also because their discovery turns fiction into fact. The ancient history of these land and peoples, as detailed in the Great Chronicle of Scota Chronicon, has long been sidelined and dismissed as being unreliable mythology. However, if we are to show that the names used in these ancient chronicles equate with the known history of Egypt, then these chronicles must be closer to real life than fable. Certainly, there is the very real prospect that the ancient history of the Greater British Isles was conceived and nurtured within the advanced culture of ancient Egypt. And since modern Judaism and Christianity were both born from Egyptian theology, the long-held notion that Ireland originally harbored the secrets of what has become known as the Old Church of Christianity may not be so far wide of the mark. Okay, so again, I say again, I don't know how folks can't make the connection between Christianity and we'll just in this case, because it's too much for some people to get in to Sumer and the Sumerian text. So I'll keep it simple, although that's the foundation of it all, them Sumerian texts. We'll go with the Egyptian civilization and their belief system. How folks can't line up the two between that and Christianity, that's what you call cognitive dissonance at its finest. All right, so who was this fabled prince of Greece who briefly became pharaoh of Egypt, who is said to have fled toward Ireland? And which pharaoh from these ancient lands would have dared give his daughter away to a renegade prince from a foreign land? The ancient text of Egypt clearly state that Egypt never gave its princesses away to foreigners, so how would this have happened? So, you know what, Egypt, I think that's a great policy. Right? All right, but at the height of the New Kingdom, pharaohs regularly took to wife the daughters of Near East princes, but refused to permit their own daughters to be married off to foreign rulers. Okay, so he's just proving his point that wasn't typically how they did it. Biblical scholars, okay, so he's just throwing this in here. Biblical scholars might point towards the marriage of King Solomon and an Egyptian princess and indicate that the ancient texts were obviously wrong in their boasting. Now, biblical people, I know y'all know that story. This did indeed remain a bit of a problem until I deduced in the Book of Solomon that King Solomon was also a lower Egyptian pharaoh himself. In other words, the princess in the biblical accounts had not been given away to a foreigner at all, as King Solomon was resident in Tanis in the Tanis in the Nile Delta. But if Egyptian princesses were never given to foreign princes, then the Scota Chronicle story is already looking suspect unless we can reinterpret it in some manner. The name of the royal father of Scota and the era in which he reigned are debatable too. Some researchers. So I'm going through all of this, fam. So just to show you how the author was looking at all of the different logical reasons on why this story of an Egyptian queen being the head of that African bloodline that turned out to be the rulers of Europe. Okay, so in this case specifically Scotland and Ireland. Okay, so I'm kind of going through this to let you know that the author did attempt to do his due diligence to go through these different particular articles. Okay, not articles, these different scenarios. Okay, the name of the royal father of Scota and the era in which he reigned are debatable too. Some researchers have been led astray by the biblical chronology because of the frequent reference to the biblical Exodus within Scota Chronicon, and so they place the era as being just after Ramesses II, the supposed pharaoh of the biblical Exodus. One interpretation of Scota Chronicon even places the era in the 6th century BC because of the mention of the Persian pharaoh of Egypt, Xerxes. Even the translator of Scotaconian, Donald Watts, is slightly confused. He placed the father of Scota in the Amarna era, which is correct, but he could not deduce exactly which pharaoh he should be. Lorraine Evans said the pharaoh concerned was Akhenaten. She was right, of course, but there was no real explanation to how she came to that conclusion. In actual fact, the truth about the error and the precise pharaoh concerned is fairly plain and simple. The pharaonic chronology is given in Book 1, Chapter 10 of Walter Bauer's Scota Chronicon. I'm telling y'all, I need to find this book. And here the author is plainly following the records of the Greco-Egyptian historian Manetho. If we list the two chronicles together, readers will clearly see the comparison. Okay, so this is how Bauer laid it out. This is how Manetho laid it out. Okay, so you can see how he's doing the different names. Amorous in the Bauer, and then Amosis in the Mantheo. So you see how it's just spelled slightly different. Shebron, Amaophis, Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of this, but you can see how they line up pretty closely on these particular pharaohs. Okay. So Horus, we all familiar with Horus, but it was interesting that it was Horus over here. Okay. All right, so let me pause for a sec. All right. So those are the different pharaohs. Okay. So again, he's just giving you the version of where Bauer, who, remember, he's the author of this Scota Chronicon, which is giving the information, is the origin of this information of an Egyptian queen of Scotland and Ireland. Okay, she was the first Egyptian queen of Scotland and Ireland, and actually Scotland is named after her. Okay, so Bauer, they're saying that they believe he got his information from Manetho, okay, which I'm assuming had to be an earlier author. All right. Okay, did he list Ramesses down there? Okay, I'm just trying to be nosy. All right. All right, so again, this just pointing out that it demonstrates that Bauer had copied Manetho's work with him in his monastery, okay? All right, so we're gonna say, let me see, Bauer had not only faithfully copied this text, minus one pharaoh, he had also added some other interesting details, which might suggest that he had access to other documents long since lost to us. The mention of Moses' birth, y'all, let me just flip back to that. Okay, he got it over here. Yeah, that was kind of tripping me out that he mentioned Moses' birth. Okay, because I told y'all I ain't no Bible scholar. I'm far from it. I only know the highlights. And then, when folks say certain things, sometimes it triggers them years and years worth of Bible classes. And I'll be like, oh, that don't sound right. It sounds familiar and it don't sound right. And then I have to go pull out the book and go over it and interpret what it really means. Okay, so I don't remember when Moses was born and what it all meant and all of that. So, that part. Okay, so the mention of Moses' birth in Bauer's account is one of these interesting additional interpolations, and the position in which this has been placed ties in very nicely with the revised history of Egypt that I have already outlined in the book Jesus, Last of the Pharaohs. The notion that Moses was actually Tooth Moses, child. So you biblical people, honey, I hope y'all enjoying this. And let me know y'all thoughts on this. Now, I ain't never heard of this child that what's his face? Let me just say the notion that Moses was actually Tooth Moses, the brother of Akhenaten. If this were so, then the biblical Moses would have been a son of Amenhotep III. Oh, okay. So Amenhotep, the third is Amenophis in Mantheo's chronology. Oh, okay. Got you. Okay. All right, so which is what Bauer appears to indicate. Thus, Moses and Akhenaten would have been brothers, which is exactly what I have previously demonstrated from other evidence and sources. Bauer and Manetho also state that the biblical Exodus took place just after the reign of Sennacherib, which is again perfectly correct according to this same revised Amarna history of Judaism, as we shall see shortly. All right, biblical folks, I hope y'all getting on. Y'all dust off y'all Bibles, or y'all probably know all this stuff already, but line this stuff up, child, because I ain't finna sit up here and lie. It's only in spurts for me. Okay, so he's just going again through the different pharaohs. All right, so let me see, where's my next notes? Okay, I think that's, yep, we talked about that. So 29. Sorry, y'all, I have to jump around because this is a big book. Okay, 29. Within Manetho's differing accounts derived from the multitude of transmission routes for his original king list. The era of Moses and the Exodus is given two possible locations or eras, either at the time of Amosis, at the beginning of the 18th dynasty, or at the time of Acharnius or Rathatus during the Amarna era. This equates very well with Manetho's other accounts and with the conclusion drawn in my previous works. In short, there were two exoduses out of Egypt involving the Judaic peoples. So did y'all know this? Child, I didn't know. Well, don't base it on me, y'all, because I wasn't up into the Bible that deep, but I at least remember this story that's taught in Christianity about the Exodus. Now, the two Exodus, I don't remember them teaching that. So the first being the great Hyksos Exodus during the reign of Amosi the first, and the second being the smaller Amarna Exodus of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Now, this tripped me out, or Akhenaten, which, same thing. And Kaya. So, y'all peep that? Nefertiti's, another name for Nefertiti is Kaya. So, all of you all with that Kaya name, which mostly I see Kayas as being melanated girls and women, there you have it. Nefertiti is that origin of that name. I thought that was pretty cool. All right, so the Exodus of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, or Kyra, at the end of the Amarna era. And so, although the translators of Manetho are confused by this apparent duplication of the Exodus, the differing accounts are perfectly correct. All right, so I did want to put that in here. Okay, thus it would appear to be abundantly clear that the pharaoh Acharnius Rathatus, the father princess Scota, was actually Akhenaten. And so we have narrowed the era of the Scota Exodus down considerably. For we now know where and approximately when the princess was born and we may even know a great deal about her life and her disappearance from Egypt. All right, y'all. So, finally, it should be noted that all of the Amarna pharaohs, including Sennacherib, this is, I'm guessing, King Tut, rather, Tutanchamun and Ai, only Akhenaten had children during his reign. Now that makes sense to me. And so the pharaoh from this era could be the father of Scota is again Akhenaten. Here, then, we appear to have a definitive resolution to the question of which pharaoh fathered Princess Scota. Whatever the level of truth and fact that resides within the rest of the Scota story, it is fairly certain that the pharaoh it speaks of is a real historical character. He was the pharaoh Akhenaten, and just as the Scottish tale implies, he presided over a pretty unstable regime. However, the Scota story happens to take place during a period of unprecedented social turmoil within Egypt, an era during which even a mighty pharaoh, Akhenaten himself, may have been forced into exile. However, would Bauer, Fordham, or any other previous chroniclers who have handled this history have known that it was entirely possible that an Egyptian princess may well have escaped from the crumbling Amarna regime of Akhenaten by boat? If the discovery of Akhenaten being the father of Scota greatly strengthens the chronicle's story, then which Akhenaten's 6 daughters could have been called Scota? All right, so let's see, page 36. All right, come on. Where's my next highlight? Oh, okay, it was just the next page. All right. Okay, I did that. All right, 36, 37. All right, so let's talk about her name. Sorry, yeah, I'm jumping around. Like many a prince or princess before and after, Scota became known for her deeds rather than her birth name. So, Gaetholus gathered together all his followers and left Egypt with his wife Scota because he was afraid to return to the region from which he had come, Greece. Because of the old feuds, he directed his course westward. Okay, so that's coming from one of the sources, one of the ancient sources talking about Gaethlios and Scota. Thus, the heroine princess became known as Scoti, or when we're using Sean Connery's accent, Shoki, a name which refers to the boat of the setting sun, the boat on which the sun god rode towards the western horizon. A more fitting name for this queen would be hard to find. This reasoning is similar to the name given in mythology. Now, this was interesting, y'all. This is interesting. I put this in here because, I just want to spark some folks thinking on the analogies he's giving. All right. So this is one of the analogies he's going to give with Princess Scota's name. How she became Princess Scota and if that's really her. All right, so this reasoning is similar to the name given in the mythology to Mary Magdalene. She too was exiled from her homeland, and she too is reputed to have sailed westwards from the eastern Mediterranean towards France in a boat with no oars or crew. So in the legends that describe this journey, the Magdalene is called Mari Stella or Sea Star. Okay, so that makes sense. So he's basically saying that just like Scota, Princess Scota became known, Princess Scota, which was that name Scota was more likely based on the boat on which the sun God rode. He's given the analogy how Mary Magdalene is called Mary Stellar or Sea Star. And since this legend, okay, and something just came to me. Don't think it slipped past me from an esoteric perspective that you have women navigating the sea and escaping. So those of you that are into esoteric, I want y'all to sip on that a little bit. So anyway, and since this legend was so important to the Illuminati, it went on to spawn Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's more modern legend of the Mary Celeste, a name that can be translated as sea heaven or perhaps sea star. Like I told y'all, it's really esoteric. Okay, so Negro. This voyage of the Magdalene also spawned the cult of the Black Madonna. It is said that several of the New Testament Marys, including Mary Magdalene, were on this voyage to the Provence in France. Whether Mary the Virgin was on this small boat or not, she was later portrayed as being black, both in France and across the wider continent. Some enterprising minorities have jumped upon this mention of blackness, as they often do, and argued that Mary was of an African phenotype, which is plain and simply nonsense born of desperation. Okay, so bear with the author here. Bear with them. That respected authors like Lynn Pickett should follow their lead just goes to show how far this political correctness has spread. There are even some overzealous types who inhabited archaeological discussion sites on the web and tried to convince all and sundry that the beautiful bust of Nefertiti demonstrate that she was a negress. So such a strategy, again, smacks of desperation. Okay, so we already know what time that is. Ain't nothing black, but yet every time they dig, it's black. So even this broad that's saying Mary Magdalene wasn't black, now you're going to say Nefertiti wasn't black, although she came out of Africa. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say that melanated people all come from Africa, but yet you want to exclude Egypt. Oh, okay then. All right. So he's saying, of course, most of the recent historians, this is my notes. Of course, most recent historians would say the idea of Mary being black, hence Jesus being black, is crazy, but yet they came from where? We know that Jesus being the Messiah was granted by the Council of Nicaea, where we have a picture, thanks to Brother Odell, shout out to Brother Odell, of that council, which was black. So would it not make sense that Jesus was black and hence his mother? All right, so let's look at this pic that Brother Odell dropped for us recently. What? Just come on, just drop this. Also, now I'm pissed. Let me pause it. I'm pissed because I literally have the link and YouTube's acting crazy. So hold on, fam. All right, I don't know why YouTube want to play with me today. Okay, so this is a drop that we did about 2 weeks ago. Shout out to Brother Odell. This is a picture of the Council of Nicaea. You know that council that made the decision for Jesus to become the Messiah? Yeah, that part. Okay, so let's see.
Yeah, that's right. But this is the Council of Nicaea 325 AD. Just confirming what the sister is saying. The church over here, and where I'm from, the church was melanated.
Yeah,
exactly.
You
So
see
the
what I'm saying?
man, the white man did not
You
bring
want
you
that?
that
No,
Bible.
Nope.
So you're saying this is a depiction of the Council of Nicaea?
Yes, sister.
Yeah.
I'm saying that. I'm saying that.
Who gives?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yes, who gave you Jesus? Who gave you Jesus?
All right, fam. So, what about Mary Magdalene or Mary, the mother of Jesus? Yeah, that part. All right. So, this is my stuff from the Age of Ascension with Brother Odell. This is part 3. Okay. So, let's get back to this work. Folks want to play crazy with us. All right. Okay. But to place the truth into public view, perhaps as a calculated snub to the Catholic authorities, the Illuminati used a series of secret codes that only the initiated would be able to decipher. Sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied. In this particular case, they simply painted Mary black. Okay, so these are some of the more excuses that folks are using. While the Illuminati may have given a host of banal reasons for this choice, from the black color denoting death to the original statues being made of ebony, the truth is that the color actually revealed Mary's true ancestry. Okay? So the author's saying, no matter how many excuses you all want to put, the lady was black. The simple answer to this cryptic code is that in the Egyptian language, black is called Cam. And at the same time, the proper name Cam happens to refer to Egypt herself. So the blackness of these Madonnas simply means that Mary, in fact, both Marys, were of Egyptian heritage, which is exactly what I relate in the book Cleopatra. Okay, because, you know, she all of a sudden turned Caucasian white also. Now, they out of Egypt, out of Africa. So again, you can't have it both ways. You can't say all black people came from Africa, but then you want to pick and choose. Oh, but no, that person, Cleopatra, was white. Jesus, Mary, them were white, aka Caucasian. Hence, that Asian and that So you can't have it both ways. This is why Mary and the infant Jesus were said to have fled to Egypt when there was a threat to his life. Mary's family was of Egyptian heritage, and so it was natural enough for Mary to go to her homeland for safety and where the young Jesus could complete his education at Heliopolis. Probably not pronouncing it right, but hey. Also, on board this small boat heading towards France was a young servant called Sarah, who again said to be black. So, for all of you women named Sarah, we're going to break down what the origin of that name, what it really means. But there's also a song dedicated to you, Sarahs, actually by 2 Caucasian men from back up in the day, Hall and Oates, called Sarah Smiles. And if you're melanated, you might know the song, either hearing your parents play it. That's how I know the song. Two Caucasian men, but they were great at R&B, Hall and Oates. So yeah, Sarah Smiles. So, but the Hebrew name Sarah simply means princess. I thought that was so sweet. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's so sweet. Sarah means princess. Oh. And so the true parentage of this young servant should be obvious. She was Mary Magdalene's daughter, fathered by Jesus. So, you biblical people, if you don't know these particular stories, the mythology, Dan Brown, I'm not gonna lie, I heard it out of Dan Brown's book. Dang, y'all know what I'm talking about. Da Vinci Code. That's where I read about the whole Mary Magdalene. She wasn't no lady of the night. Because you know, in the Bible, women always got to be for the streets. Either for the streets. Well, either way, it's for the streets. Because I was going to say, you know, making a man fall from his glory, whatever the case may be, misleading him and making him fall from grace. Always got to be for the streets, according to the Bible. You know, that's what they say. Mary Magdalene was for the streets. She was a lady of the night. But other accounts say that was his old lady. That was his wife, and they had a daughter. This young Sarah, or princess, is especially venerated by the gypsy community at Saint Mary's de la Mer in Provence, France, where the small boat is supposed to have come ashore. The gypsies reenact Sarah's arrival on these shores every 24th and 25th of May and hold a festival there. See, I didn't know that, child. I didn't know that. So if y'all haven't read the Da Vinci Code, or just go watch the movie. I forgot, y'all, they done made a movie out of it. I read the book because the book became really, really popular. Dan Brown goes into all of this about Mary Magdalene and Jesus, and it was pretty good. He did a very, very good job with it. It's a lot of symbolism in the movie and in the book. But anyway, I didn't know they hold a festival every year. This again demonstrates the possible link between the story of Egypt, as the name for the gypsies themselves is also supposed to have been derived from the name Egypt. See, I didn't even know that. But gypsies, Egypt, yeah, pretty close. All right, so let's get on to Gaithilos. Using these different sources, a consistent picture begins to emerge about the turbulent times and royal marriage that occurred at about the time of biblical Exodus. In the time of Moses, there was a certain king of one of the kingdoms of Greece called Neolus. He had a son who was good looking but mentally unstable, Gaithlios by name. Since he had not been permitted to hold any position of power in the kingdom, he was provoked to anger, and with the support of a large number of friends, he inflicted many disasters on his father's kingdom. He greatly outraged both his father and the inhabitants of the country with his violent behavior. So he was driven out of his native land and sailed off to Egypt. And there, since he was outstandingly brave and daring and of royal descent, he was united in marriage with Scota, the daughter of Pharaoh. So they're given a different Pharaoh. Again, the author is just pointing out another account of Gaithias, who was the husband of Queen Scota, who it is said that Scotland got its name from. Okay, so he's just giving another account of Gaithias' existence and the fact that he was exiled from his homeland. Just giving another account. All right. Okay, so it says, note here that the comment about the prince being mentally unstable, which is an obvious comment about the Amarna dynasty. Akhenaten was known as the unstable one, the criminal of Akhenaten, or the heretic pharaoh. But while this mental instability was a particularly comment about Akhenaten himself, from the Theban Amun priesthood point of view, it is likely that it also applied to the Amarna dynasty. Okay, I mean that's reasonable. And in particular to any of the administration and royal family who publicly supported the god Aten. Professor Watt, the translator of Scota Chronicon, sees this royal instability as being an unusual feature of the text. He says this: it is curious that Gaithlius' early life is portrayed in such hostile terms, which have no parallel in the Irish tradition. Another account in Bauer's story says that Gaithlius married his Egyptian princess before he exiled to Egypt. Yet another indicates that Gaithlius and his army were assisting pharaohs to y'all, I had to highlight this for y'all again. Yet another indicates that the Gaithlius and his army were assisting Pharaoh to eject the Israelites, the Hyksos, from Egypt. Finally, one last chronicle indicates that Gaithlius, now called Aglalius, was actually battling his brother Apis rather than his father. All right, so I just found it interesting that they were talking about them kicking out the Israelites out of Egypt, of course. And so, but the point of this, he was saying that he probably wasn't battling his father, but it was his, he was actually battling his brother rather than his father. Firstly, it should be noted that it is entirely possible that Mantheo was the original source for Scota Chronicon. Yeah, and we kind of picked that up too. Secondly, both of these stories occurred at substantially the same time. The Gaithlios story relates to the era of Akhenaten, as we have seen, while the Hermes story relates to the time of Akhenaten's uncle. Thirdly, the story of Gaithlios eventually ends up in Ireland, where some of the newcomers to that island were known as Tuatha De Danann, or, okay, you biblical people, because y'all like to talk about these tribes of this, tribes of that. Ciao. So they said that the story of Gaithlios eventually ends up in Ireland, where some of the newcomers to that island were known as Tuatha De Danann, or the tribe of Danann. If this is true, then some of the exiles who left Egypt with King Gaithlios must have been the tribe of Danann. Okay, so ain't that the tribe of Dan, y'all? I ain't trying to start nothing. All right, so I'm not going to go through, I didn't go through all of this, but, You could certainly pick up this book and go through it yourself, because child, he goes through Caesar and all of that. He really breaks this stuff down and correlates it to the Bible. I wasn't trying to do all that for this purpose. All right. So I did want to get into these Phoenicians. Let's get into these Phoenicians. Unfortunately, the origin of the Phoenicians are shrouded in mystery, and classical mythology merely suggests a homeland in Scotia, a modern Ukraine. Now, child, like I said, I didn't learn me something new again. I didn't know that. I didn't know that, child. So that puts a new spin on this whole Ukraine stuff. Did not know that, fam. However, in complete contrast to this, it is a fact that the majority of Phoenician art and architecture display distinctly Egyptian influences and styles, and so a close cultural link to the exile Hyksos Israelite is entirely possible. So I want y'all to think about what's going on in Ukraine today. I did not know there was a connection with what is called Ukraine, the Phoenicians, and the Israelites. The most probable answer to which classical history subscribes is that the military and political pressures forced these people out into the Mediterranean. But the new twist to this history is that this was not pressure from the Hittites upon the peoples of the Leviathan coast. Instead, this was a few centuries earlier. The pressure came from Upper Egypt, and it was applied to the Hyksos pharaohs of Lower Egypt. The first wave of migrants would have set out from Egypt 1580 BC, as Amos the First swept power in Lower Egypt and forced the Hyksos people out of the country and into new coastal settlements across the Eastern Mediterranean. This, however, was not the only civil war in Egypt, and the religious reforms of Akhenaten in the 14th century BC destabilized Egypt in strikingly similar fashion. Because if I'm not mistaken, didn't Akhenaten change from many worship of different Egyptian gods into one singular worship of a god which carries all of the faiths, the different religious faiths today? All right, so once more, sections of the Lower Egyptian Hyksos people and monarchy were being pushed out across the Mediterranean in a flotilla of small craft. All right. So, child. So remember the Hyksos, they're Israelites. Okay. All right, I gotta go back to my thing. All right, let me see. Go back to my thing. Bear with me here, fam. All right. We talked about that. Okay. The Phoenicians, who are also known for the origins of banking. But let's continue. This new nation was, of course, the Phoenicians. Okay, so let me back this up. I'm gonna have to back it up to give it a little bit more content. We have looked at the Minoan Empire in some detail and witnessed its eventual demise. That's why I'm saying, you all, he did a very good job in this book Just for the sake of time and to keep us as focused as I can, I had to skip all of that out. But he went through the different empires and stuff because what he's trying to do is prove the point of how this Egyptian queen, nicknamed Scota, the name Scotland or Scots was based on her. Okay, so he went through all of the different time periods, all of the different empires, did the little comparison, this, that, and the third. But you learn a lot when you're reading along with him through this. All right. So, however, nothing in human history is static, and where one empire fails, a new nation normally rises to fill the strategic and commercial vacuum. No kidding. The seafaring economy of the Mediterranean was to be no different, and so as the last of the Minoans ebbed away, the mainland Greeks rose in maritime power and influence. But such was the scale of the available commerce that there was room for another player in this market, and so a small nation from the Levant began to make inroads into this Greek dominance of the seas. This new nation was, of course, the Phoenicians. However, one researcher in the field reports that the rise of the Phoenicians may have been closely and casually linked with the demise of the Minoans. The Phoenicians and the Celts may have originated in the Indus Valley and also from the Knossos civilization of Crete. As mentioned previously, a cultural link between the y'all know what I'm trying to say. Minoans and Phoenicians would make a degree of sense, as both were major maritime empires, and the latter simply seem to have taken over when the former declined. That the Phoenicians may have been linked to the Minoan allies, the Israelites, is implicit in their original name, as they appear to have called themselves. See that, y'all? I didn't even know that that's the Canaans, the Canaan, or the Canaanites. I didn't know that the original Canaanites was Kenaani, the derivative of that name. This term is traditionally said to mean merchant. Now, y'all peep that game? Child, I ain't set up and lied upon these people. None of that. That's what they're saying. Canaanites, this term is traditionally said to mean merchant, while the land of Canaan refers to lowlands. The book Cleopatra translates the term merchant as the more accurate meaning banker. What did I say the Phoenicians are known for? They're known for the origins of what? Banking. The book of Leviticus relates that the land of Canaan was given to the Israelites after Joshua conquered it. And since Joshua was the next generation after Moses, this event would have been just after the exodus of Gaitholos and just before the rise of the Phoenician Empire. This account and the previous arguments that have been discussed therefore demonstrate possible links between the Israelites, the Minoans, and the Phoenicians. These may have been simply trading links, although it is much more likely in this kind of era that any such links were also cemented with a royal alliance, absolutely. With Minoan princesses being packed off to Avaris and Armana. The offsprings of these diplomatic unions would then be free to travel back to Crete and take with them the intermingled Egyptian Minoan culture. Okay, so in other words, these different nations were intermarrying. And we know this is not far-fetched because that's how they've been doing it. It's how they've been doing it across the planet. Okay? That's how it was done in Europe, with the Pits intermarrying with the McAlpines, them who are from Africa. Okay? In the Americas, with the Europeans intermarrying with the indigenous people of the Americas, aka the Indians. What do we see happening today in Africa? Aren't the Chinese in Africa? And aren't Chinese men marrying and having children with African women? That's always how it's been done. So this is not far-fetched at all. Further evidence that the Phoenicians and the Minoas were closely related can be seen in the name given to the Phoenician boat, which was Kefti, or Kefti. But the Egyptian name for the Minoans was Kefti. Oh, that's the same thing. And the Bible calls them Captor. Yeah, they was intermingling and marrying each other and all of this jazz. However, the Bible's concordance in its usual manner does confirm that all these tribes were much the same, or at least very closely related. So the Captor, the original home of the Philistines, perhaps on the southwest coast of Asia Minor, maybe in Egypt or close by, or more probably on the island of Crete. The Philistine, and inhabited Philistia, descendants of Masrium, who immigrated from Crete to the western sea coast of Canaan. Canaan, the fourth son of Ham and the progeny of the Phoenicians and of the various nations who people the sea coast of Palestine. So in other words, y'all, they was just marrying with each other. Okay? The results of these observations is that Captor was Cree, the Egyptians Kefti, and the Philistines came from Cree. The Minoans came from Cree. The Canaanites were Phoenicians. The Phoenicians came from Canaan. Canaan and Philistia were neighboring countries. Both the Canaanites and the Philistines were immediate descendants of Ham, and the Philistines were the descendants of Masrium. However, in the Bible, Masrium means Egypt, and so the Philistines were descendants of Egypt. Go on, author. You broke that down. Thus, it would appear that the Minoans, Phoenicians, Canaanites, and Philistines were pretty much one and the same people. It has already been demonstrated that the Canaanites was substantially an Egypto-Israelite nation, as has been discussed in the book Solomon, that their descendants, the Phoenicians, may well have been descendants from Egyptian exiles, those Hyksos Israelites, is confirmed by the overtly Egyptian nature of their artwork. Time and time again, the artwork motifs of the Phoenicians are demonstrably based upon Egyptian antidotes, or based upon Egyptian. And I always wondered about that. But as I started getting deeper into studying, it made sense. Okay, and we know that when the Israelites, when they move around, they marry into cultures and they blend. So they bring their customs into a new culture, and they take on other cultures' customs. Okay? The excavation at Phoenician Carthage, for example, unearthed the following trinkets. This material is undoubtedly Egyptian inspiration. The most common figuration themes are the, child know what that is, the Wadjet eye and the Pathichus. We also have the hawk, Horus, Bes, and Thoth. Less frequent are certain divine beings like Isis, Man, Khonsu, Shu, Khnum of Amun-Ra, Sekhmet, Anubis. Okay, so I'm also noticing that Shu, I know that carries over in the Asian culture as well. And anything with Khan in it, we know carries over to the Asian culture as well. I'm just saying, y'all. Just saying. In other words, nearly every Egyptian deity can be found within the sparse remains of the city of Carthage. Okay, and you do a little research. Carthage also was melanated. The earliest ancient coins and stuff had melanated people on there, and literally with an afro. Even Phoenician architecture is overtly based upon Egyptian styles, with the typical Egyptian cornice at the top of the building being a favorite theme. These cornices were even adorned with multiple urae and the winged solar disc, rendering them almost indistinguishable from the Egyptian equivalent, except perhaps in the quality of their workmanship. But if the Phoenician art was based upon Egyptian style, then their language also shows great affinity to what? Hebrew. And like I said, Hebrew is a derivative of all of the languages. So you could put Hebrew in there. The Islamic, I'm trying to pronounce it correctly, but Islamic writings, Aramaic writings, all of that's based on cuneiform. Okay? So that's interesting that then their language also shows great affinity to Hebrew. The affinity of Phoenicians with other languages of the first millennium is considerable and seems to show a strictly parallel development, particularly as far as Hebrew is concerned. The comparison between Phoenician and Hebrew does indeed show autonomy, but above all, it shows coexistence and parallel development. Again, no surprise to me. None whatsoever. All right? So, let me pause and I'll be right back. All right. Okay. All right. So, we talked about the Phoenicians and how the Phoenicians' language is tied very close to Hebrew, which would make sense if they were intermarrying and all of that particular jazz. Okay. So we're not going to read through this, but he's just giving you examples of the Egyptian cultural things and the Phoenician interpretation of them. Okay, and everybody know this winged disc. Okay, and he's saying right here, the golden flying sun disk of Ra, the original golden bird wings of Ra are displayed above of the doorway of the London office. Okay. All right, so that should be of no surprise to anyone. So let me just make sure I'm recording. I am. All right, so let's see where we are. We're almost done, family. Let's see. We talked about that. We talked about that. I think we talked about that. Okay, no, we didn't. Okay, so Ashtaroth, that the Phoenicians may have linked to the Israelite is hardly surprising. They sprang from the same geographical location as of the high-cost Israelites, and they worshiped the same gods. Although there were strong movements against polytheism within the Judaic culture, Baal was still worshipped throughout the Levant and by the Phoenicians. The scale of the undercurrent of polytheism with Judaism can be glimpsed in this biblical quote from Kings. And the high places that were before Jerusalem, which were on the right hand of the movement of corruption, which Solomon, the king of Israel, had built for Ashtoreth, the abomination of the, that was the original name of the Phoenicians, when the Bible is saying Zidonians. Interesting. The Zidonians / Phoenicians, and for Shemos, the abomination of the Moabites, and for the Milcom, the abomination of the children of Ammon, did the king defile. Here are 3 pagan gods and goddesses whom King Solomon had built temples for. A list that includes Ashtoreth, which is the biblical spelling for the Phoenician, mother goddess, Astarte. I know I'm not proud. Astarte, I think that's it. Astarte. This is interesting. This is being made clear in the quote above because the temple of Astarte was made for the Zidonians, the inhabitants of the Leviatine city of Sidon, who were also called the Phoenicians. But the god of the Phoenicians were not only the same as the gods of the high-cost Israelites, they were, of course, also the same as the traditional Egyptian gods. Astarte is only a Phoenician version of the Egyptian Est, or Isis, the mother goddess of fertility and the wife of Osiris, Asar, or Osiris. Child, like I told y'all, I done learned me something new. And learned me a lot of something new in here. This author did an absolutely wonderful job with this. All right, so I'm not going to go through this. He's just showing the different comparisons of the different goddess worship. Okay, now notice goddess worship, because in that Judea, Christianity faith, and Islamic faiths and all of that, they stripped the goddesses from their faith. But those early civilizations had goddess worship. Okay, so he's just showing you that the Minoan had a snake goddess and the Phoenician had similar. Okay. All right, so what page is that? We left off 154. I think we did this already. Yep, we did that. Okay, let's see. So bear with me. This highlight thing. Okay, let's go to this list. Yeah, I want y'all to see this list of templates. Okay, we did that. So we might be, well, what else? Bear with me, fam. This thing could get funny funnier sometimes. Okay, I think we went through all of that. Okay, I think that's it. Yep, we did Asar rather, or Osiris. So I think we're good. Okay, so I'm not going to go through this entire thing. I just wanted to show you the logic of this author. And you can certainly go through this yourself. Here's the table of contents and how he's going through each one of these civilizations and doing some comparisons and tying it all back to these folks coming out of Africa at the end of the day. Okay. So, last thing I'll roll through. The Exodus timeline. This revised history of Egypt, Israelite nation, has highlighted a number of exoduses to and from Egypt. The complexity of this history has probably generated an amount of confusion, and so the diagram overly attempts to portray these migrations graphically in order to clarify the situation as much as possible. The top of the chart gives the names of the pharaohs of Egypt for each significant era, while the lower register gives the equivalent Old Testament patriarch who lived in the same era. Shoot, sorry, y'all, I can't even blow it up. Doggone it. All right, I wish I could blow it up, so ain't no need me even showing y'all that. I'll kind of pretty it up for y'all to make it legible. And I'll put it in as a still shot so you can compare these particular timelines with the Exodus and the rulers. Okay, so I just thought that was something interesting as well. Okay, so again, he did an absolute excellent job. This is Scota, Egyptian Queen of the Scots, Egyptian Testimony, Series, Book 5. And now, whether or not this is still true, meaning that the name Scotland and Ireland, specifically the name Scotland or the Scots, came from an Egyptian queen named Scota, I don't know. He laid out a good argument, but it's mythology, according to most. He definitely laid out a good argument. Okay. It certainly intrigued me because we do know that the original bloodline of Scotland and the British Isles, documented history, says Kenneth MacAlpine, now known as MacAlpine, started that rulership. Okay, now what they leave out was that he was from Africa. He was known as Kenneth MacAlpine the Niger, and it says he was from Ethiopia. Okay. All right. And it talks about here somewhere in the mix that they married into the Pits. Now, whether or not the Pits were originally indigenous to the land, or if they also came out of Africa, that's kind of controversial also. All right. So we are going to continue this particular series. I might even drop something this week because this series, Black Nobility, Bloodlines and Rulers, we're literally going through all of these different rulers and all of the different houses. And shout out to Sis Brooklyn Brogy for giving me this source of information. Absolutely great information. This is from the book, The Negro Rulers of Scotland and the British Isles by Dr. John L. Johnson. Okay. So I just found this particular theory very, very interesting. Based on what we know from king of the Niger out of Ethiopia. All right. So again, this is from Scota, Egyptian Queen of Scots. Just giving you again. By Ralph Ellis. All right. So I don't know for sure, fam, if this is true. What I do know is that the bloodline of the Black nobility, they came out of what is now known as Africa, and they brought with them their religious beliefs, political beliefs, and how to run societies. That we do know. Okay? And we do know that they are tied to the Romans. We do know that they're tied to the quote Israelites, which all of that still carries the same religious, political beliefs as well, and the way the societies are structured, which the foundation of that is from Egypt. So it's not far-fetched that this story is true. Okay? About an Egyptian queen named Scota is the origin for the name Scot. All right? So you do with it what you may. Shout out to the sis that sent me this particular information. It's well worth exploring. If somebody else has something to put on it, have you all heard of this theory before? If so, what are your thoughts on it? And do you know any more insight? So I hope you got something out of this. I know this one was a long one. But there you have it. So if you are not subscribed to us, I highly encourage you to subscribe, like, and share this video. I wish everyone well on this Tuesday. This is Rhonda with WTUZ Radio Podcast. Peace and love, family.